Welcome back to the weekly Trusted Visions podcast. We welcome Shaun Rose, one of the members of the Trusted Visions team that's had great success in the industry. Shaun, welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. This is the eve of my birthday. I'm only going to turn 27 years old. I'm just saying. So everybody know that.
Right. Happy early birthday.
Hey, I appreciate it, buddy. So really, we wanted to continue on with this topic that we're covering for this month of past, present, and future. And we talked about how the industry is evolving, the consolidation that's happening, the regulations that are happening that are negatively impacting both broker-dealers, revenues to broker-dealers, and then trickles down to financial advisors. So today, I figured we'd switch gears a little bit and rather than talking about the industry as a whole and the environment we're in, really getting more microscopic in this discussion of how does this impact financial advisors and their practice? And more importantly, how do financial advisors, first and foremost, have the foresight to know, hey, I need to start looking around, and B, what can they do to protect their practice with all of the consolidation and the regulatory environment we're in and the technology advancement? So I want to kick it off to you, Shaun. You've been doing this. You and I have been doing this for a long time. I've always highly respected your approach and opinion in the industry. And first, let's start with, are there patterns that advisors, OSJs, or enterprises can start to see with their broker-dealers that should cause some alarm, concern, or raise the red flags?
Sure. Thank you. I would say absolutely. And one of those patterns that I've witnessed over the past 20 years is really associated with fees and cost. But before I get into that, I just want to say that after 20 years in the business, most broker-dealers will increase cost at some point, simply due to the fact that it costs to run a business. And as we all know, running a broker-dealer isn't a charity. And for the most part, these firms operate on very small margins. However, with that, I believe every advisor owes it to themselves and their clients to administer due diligence on their current broker-dealer on an annual basis. Take inventory, especially as it relates to pricing and monthly costs. Take notice of any fee increases and also the implementation of fees that no other broker-dealer may have. For example, let's say E&O. If annual premiums are increasing substantially year over year, you want to ask your broker-dealer some questions. You want to find out, hey, is this attributed to, a significant incident that happened? Do we have, brokers, at the firm? Or is there maybe a potential revenue driver within the E&O cost? Tech fees is something that I've noticed that increase, typically on a consistent basis. However, if your technology fee is increasing as an advisor, and you're not receiving any additional technology, you may want to ask that question. That could be an area of concern. Any fee to process business, I'm starting to hear more and more often that there have been fees associated with opening business and processing business. Any advisor that's experiencing that, you definitely want to ask some questions. Marketing costs. I spoke with an advisor recently who make interesting, conversation about marketing. So this particular advisor does not have a website simply because he feels that the firm overcharges. And when I asked him to just take a deeper dive into that and what does he really mean by that, he said, well, listen, there's a supervision charge, which I mentioned to him that's everywhere. If you have a website, every broker dealer is going to charge you that. However, in lieu of that supervision fee, there's a $50 fee just to have a website. And it's not attributed to a website vendor or a host. It's just a $50 fee from the broker dealer. So those are the type of things you want to look at on an annual basis and certainly formulate that plan B so you can do the cost comparison. Another item I wanted to touch on really quickly here, payouts. From a pattern that I've witnessed over the past 20 years have been a payout change, and typically there's a reduction. It's very seldomly increased. And from my experience, most of these payouts are attributed to a merger and acquisition. New ownership comes in and they immediately evaluate the balance sheet. If you're an advisor that benefited from an enhanced payout, based on relative to industry standards, those typically are reduced. However, as an advisor, if you notice that your payout is being reduced, and you notice that there aren't any, necessarily enhancements, for your practice, but on the flip side, you observe that, your broker dealer is paying 50%, 70%, 80% upfront packages as an independent, and those new advisors are benefiting from enhanced payouts, and you may want to, ask some questions and formulate that plan B to compare once again.
Yeah, and you brought up a couple really good points there, Shaun. With E&O, I mean, everybody's anticipating that E&O insurance is going to go up because now there's cybersecurity risks and there's increased in costs in that. And I think you're correct in that statement of that shouldn't necessarily raise an alarm. And It doesn't mean you shouldn't ask questions of, hey, can you help us understand why E&O went up? But another good point, and we're seeing this a lot, and I would love your opinion on this, is we've seen a lot of broker dealers. I wouldn't say a lot. We've seen some broker dealers out there that are increasing costs and reducing payouts. And to your point, when you say they're working off with slim margins, we both know that. They're typically working off 5 to 10% profit margins.
Right.
But on the flip side of that, what advice would you give to advisors? And I don't want to give my opinion because it drives me crazy, but when you see broker dealers that are doing that, but yet offering 2-3 times more in transition packages than industry standard, what advice would you give to advisors that are in that situation?
My advice would be to formulate a plan B. Understand that you are an independent practitioner, meaning that you're not subject to just any change that a broker dealer wants to just kind of shove down your practice. There are great outfits out there. We represent several. Make sure that even if you're not, necessarily looking to move immediately, you want to make sure that you still cover the bases of administering that due diligence. Because what I found throughout my 20 years is that with the advisors that may not have been looking for a change, but felt the need to explore, and they end up finding a better scenario. From a pricing standpoint, from a cost standpoint, from a cultural standpoint, and it just makes sense. Some of my most successful recruiting experience came from advisors that were not necessarily interested in moving at the time when they initiated conversations with me. However, just formulating a plan B was the initiative or the motive. They ended up making a change, and they made a change for the betterment of their practice and their clients. I mean, there are some services out there, some broker dealers that really benefit the client as well and the client experience.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a good point. I think always having that plan B, and we work a lot with advisors that it starts out as a plan B just to protect your practice. And if you're working with a firm, and this isn't necessarily just a pitch for Trusted Visions, but if you're working with a firm like Trusted Visions that's really trying to push their agenda of that plan B, plan being a plan A, no disrespect, but they're not doing their job. Because we work with advisors, and I'm working with one right now that it did start out as a plan B. And then when he started seeing the technology and the offerings, then he's like, I didn't realize how advanced other broker dealers are. And so my point in saying that is, ask the firms that you're working with if they're going to push you and be aggressive in the recruiting approach, or if they're truly going to look out for your best interest, and let's just explore this as a plan B. One other question before we move on to the next subtopic, Shaun, is we've seen some firms out there start adding fees that have never been heard of in the industry. They call them direct-to-fund fees. They call them, they're starting to say, hey, if we don't have this much in assets with this product company, you can still sell it, but yet we're not going to pay you commissions. And again, fees go up throughout our career in the firms we've been with. They're going to slightly increase fees. That's going to happen.
It's going to happen.
But from a red flag standpoint, what are your thoughts on, it's not like these broker dealers are being innovative and saying, hey, let's come up with a fee that every broker dealer should charge and be the first to do it. what is your advice to those advisors? Because again, it's unheard of, and at least in my 20 years of doing this, I've never seen it. So what advice would you give to advisors when they're in that situation?
Right. And to your point, I'm starting to hear more and more about these type of fees. My advice stands firm. Make sure that you explore your options, formulate a plan B. And it's certainly a red flag. And you have to think as an advisor, and I always, over my 20 years have mentioned this to advisor, you are the bottom line at these broker dealers. It's not a product, because most independent broker dealers do not have a product. It's you. It's you as an advisor. And if you're not with a firm that has your best interest or your client's best interest in mind and trying to help you accomplish your vision, that is not the place to be. And when you start experiencing those type of fees, it's typically because you're not on the front line of the priority list. It's about the revenue. That is some of the fees I'm hearing about is just pure revenue drivers, and that is all. Nothing else behind it. There's no benefit to it. And I've even heard some, advisors mention that when they heard about the fees, the broker-dealer explanation was, well, it's Reg BI. And that's not...
Always blaming on regulation, right?
Right. And that doesn't suffice, because if that was the case, every firm would have that fee. And it's not the case, so you want to be on alert when that happens, because if it starts to happen, a couple of times and you accept it as an advisor, be prepared to accept more. Be prepared to accept additional fee increases, because they are a broker dealer. When they start implementing those type of fees, once again, it's typically just for the sake of the revenue of the broker dealer.
Yeah, and that's a good point. So let's move on to the next subset of this topic or this week's podcast. With all of that being said, and the red flags and the patterns and the having a plan B in place, what can advisor, OSJ, or enterprise do to protect their practice and or their advisors within their group? And with that, I think there's a couple different things. And when you say plan B, Shaun, I think it's very important to know as an advisor, OSJ, or enterprise, should things continue to go awry, where would I go? Because the last thing you want to do as an advisor, OSJ, or enterprise is at the 11th hour and you realize, hey, I can't handle it anymore. It's not like you can just flip the switch and move to another broker dealer in a matter of a day, a week, a month. Right. And so it's very important to work with firms like Trusted Visions. And again, I'm not trying to just pitch Trusted Visions. There's other great third-party recruiting firms out there, but work with firms like ours that have a pulse on the industry. I know you and I, Shaun, we talk daily, most of the time, about just things going on in the industry. I've made it a pattern throughout my career of every morning I do the same thing, read some of the publications, look at where advisors are leaving, where they're joining, the trends there of why. I look at what's going on from a regulatory standpoint or a political standpoint, just so that we understand what's going on in the industry. Just like advisors keep an eye and a pulse on the market, rely on a firm like ours that has a pulse on the industry and has a strong understanding of the direction they're going. Right. In addition to that, I think it's vital and a really important, if you are an OSJ or an enterprise leader, be talking to your advisors within your group regularly and routinely, and keep them involved. If you are formulating a plan B, it's okay to go to your advisors and say, hey, I'm looking at some options, not meaning that we're leaving, but what's important to you, because you're a vital part of the success of our OSJ or enterprise. Right. When you go down the opposite path as an OSJ or enterprise leader, where you start doing your due diligence on your own and you're not seeking input from your advisors, we've found throughout our experience, should you make a move, your retention rate is much lower of the advisors within your group, because they didn't have a say in the direction that you're planning on going. And so if you have 20, 30, 100 advisors within your group, they all have different needs, different wants, and different wish lists. Start involving them in that process and really go down the path of understanding what broker dealers have the strengths that you're looking for and I know David's brought this up in past podcasts. I actually worked with an advisor last week about the scorecard. And, he was really debating between two different broker-dealers that he liked a lot. And so what we did was we talked about what's important to you. And it came down to culture, technology, payouts and pricing, the OSJ that he was planning on joining between the two of them. And we scored it from a 1 to 5, 1 being the worst, 5 being the best on each category. And, although one broker dealer was going to offer twice as much as the other, he actually chose the other one simply based off of the scorecard. And it was kind of comical. It was literally a half a point difference between one broker dealer and the other. Right. And so, having that plan B and understanding, you don't necessarily have to say, I'm going to this broker dealer, but should I make a move or need to make a move, I know which broker dealer, based off of what is important to me and the advisors within my group are important to me. This is the broker dealer I would go to. Right. You can even start that approval process. It doesn't bind you to joining that broker dealer, but it at least allows you to get down the path should things go awry. Because, right. What we're finding is some of these broker dealers that are reducing payouts and increasing fees or implementing fees that are unheard of, they're potentially going to lose a substantial amount of advisors in short order, and you don't want to be left there in the dust trying to scramble to find something. So right. Any thoughts on that, Shaun, from the perspective of, exploring your options and working with firms like ours? I mean, you've been a recruiter, as have I, with several broker dealers where we're a corporate recruiter, and there's advantages to that. But recruiters within broker dealers, and I'm not saying this in a bad way, please, everybody that's listening to this know that, but you have one offering that may or may not fit all of the needs of that advisor versus a firm like Trusted Visions. We have relationships with a gamut of broker dealers, and we can talk through that. So any thoughts on that, Shaun?
Sure. Well, I agree with many of the points you just made and articulated. And just to go back to the OSJ, I think it's incredibly important for an OSJ, if they start to feel some pain points, communicate that with their team. Because what I've also experienced on the reverse, maybe not necessarily, I know you mentioned the retention aspect, but even on a different aspect of, if the OSJ feels the pain point, typically the advisors do as well. And I've seen OSJs lose their top advisors to other broker dealers because the OSJ felt the pain points, but didn't think it was enough to, explore options where the advisor decided that it was time to go. And they ended up losing, their top producer. So that is just to reinforce what you mentioned. As an OSJ, is very important. If you start to experiencing, different challenges at your broker dealer, to get your guys involved and really drill down and just test the temperature, test the water. And but absolutely. So I agree with the points you mentioned. I do think that, advisors, as I mentioned before, owe it to themselves and their clients to find the best option so they can produce and be happy and attain their vision, and accomplish the goals that they have for their business.
Yeah, and that's a phenomenal point, Shaun, of the OSJ may not be feeling the pain that the advisors are, but if you as the OSJ or enterprise leader stay with the firm that is going through those changes, right, you got to ask yourself, what are you going to have left of your OSJ group if a lot of your advisors have already left? And so you owe it not necessarily just to yourself as an OSJ or enterprise leader, but you owe it to your advisors to protect them and their practice. That's some would disagree with this, but that's your responsibility and liability as their OSJ or enterprise leader, is to look out for not only your best interest and your client's best interest, but also your advisors and their practice and their client's best interest. So, Shaun, greatly appreciate you taking part in this week's podcast. You were a valued member of the Trusted Visions team. We look forward to anybody's feedback about this podcast. Feel free to post any questions you may have. We will wrap up this month's topic next week of past, present, and future. We thank you. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to email info@trustedvisions.com. Have a great week and look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you.